Hi again, everyone.
So, welcome to the third episode of What Do You Think podcast. I'm Natanya, and
I'm Mia.
will be our host for today. This month, our topic comes back again to socio-political themes. In this episode, we want to talk about youth engagement in politics and how we, as young Indonesians abroad, could maintain that engagement.
Nah, di episode hari ini tuh, we are joined by the most unexpected, surprising, amazing, wonderful, the coolest guest speaker ever. And we are very grateful to be joined by Kak Abigail Limuria. Hi, Kak. Which is
Hello.
likely not an unfamiliar name for everyone listening. So she is the co-founder of What Is Up Indonesia, aka Wiwi, and she's also the co-initiator to Bijak Memilih. So welcome to What Do You Think, Kak?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yay, okay.
Yay!
Oh, fun fact, Kak, by the way. So me and Nat, we both met from the Wiwi Journal Club season 2.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah,
We
we
didn't even know
did.
each other existed, even though we went to the same campus. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
Uh-uh.
Oh, I'm very happy to hear that. How was your experience?
It's really cool. It's such a fruitful a fruitful experience banget ya. Dan kayak I think kalau misalnya bisa di lebih banyakin platforms that has that that same idea gitu. I think it's gonna be really cool.
Mm,
Hmm.
yeah, we're starting our season 3 right now. Yeah,
In
hopefully
fact,
nanti. Kenapa?
talking about that, I actually joined season 3.
Oh, you did?
I did.
Which-
I was in stream A. You were there.
Oh,
I was like, should I say hi? I just thought
okay,
it was
okay.
really
That was a
funny.
really fun discussion. Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
gitu. Oh my God. Because like everyone was saying kayak aku dari Jakarta, aku dari Surabaya, and then Nat was like aku dari Melbourne, and I was like, excuse me.
We're
Yeah.
like,
Like, we talked and then like we connected and then we founded this podcast.
oh, that's so cool.
Gitu. So
I've
thank you so
had
much.
we've had like 3 romantic couple
oh
formed
my
because of
gosh.
the Wiwi community.
Serious.
But this is the first time I've heard kayak podcast co-host join.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's cool.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So I think we're gonna start with something really broad dulu kali ya. Very something that's very general. I think this is also like for the three of us. What does political literacy mean to you? And like apa ya kayak how do you see political literacy in your own point of view? Let's start
Mm,
with Kak Abigail dulu kali ya.
yeah. I think political literacy simply means you know what's going on politically in your country, the world. So it's like being street smart, but for politics gitu. Jadi so you know how you interact with society, how society are governed, how your government uh do their thing, how do they create a regulation, how does your vote affects, for example, the policy surrounding you and things like that. So basically being literate in how politics work. It's as simple as that, I think.
No, yeah, totally agree. And I think I want to add to that juga. Kayaknya it's also kayak utilizing the right tools to basically digest and inform political information juga. I think that's also
Mhm.
as political.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have like the framework, right, of how politics work, and then you also have the knowledge of events and history, current events, and things like that to process in that framework of politics. So it definitely have like way of thinking, like the thinking framework, but also like the content and the knowledge itself.
That's true.
I
True.
totally agree with the understanding history is also a part of political literacy. Um, for example, like me studying in Australia, I surprisingly do a lot of like my essays and things like that, surprisingly surrounding Indonesia. So it's like me studying here is like an excuse for me to study Indonesia again, but in English.
Mm.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
through an academia lens, right?
It is through academia, so it's not maybe as street smart, but I'm
But
starting
yeah,
to.
no, that's definitely a dimension in understanding politics and being politically literate, right?
Mhm.
That's true, that's true. And I think a lot of us mungkin have different ini ya, different motivations on in being interested in political literacy. Kalau Kak Abigail, what's your personal apa ya? Your personal reason, your personal motivation on being interested in political literacy?
Hmm. I guess it's a long journey. Like, of course, I don't start off being politically literate or caring about politics. Kayak obviously nggak ada lah kita yang dilahirin tiba-tiba kayak saya mau belajar
Ya
politik.
lah.
Nggak ada gitu. Uh,
Yeah.
but to put it simply, I started to care more about social issues when I was in uni. Um, and growing up, I was very sheltered, right? I was never really, I never really interacted with politics. My parents really shielded me from politics also due to like their trauma in like 98, things like that. So I was very sheltered. And then, but as I went to uni, I started to care more about social issue. And maybe for those of you who are hearing, or maybe you guys, if you begin to care about social issue and if you dig long enough, you will end up finding out that there's always politics in social
Yeah.
issues. And so that's how I became more aware about politics and their relevancy towards a lot of social issues like education, women's rights, justice, and things like that. As a first, and then the second part is my long journey after coming back to Indonesia, and I have the opportunity to interview a lot of women figure, and including those women in politics because I was writing a book, and because of that I get to interview like Bu Sri Mulyani, Retno, Najwa Shihab, about their lives. And from that experience, I realized how pervasive politics are and how relevant it is to our day-to-day life. Like I realized like the price of food and drinks that I like are affected by politics, for example. And can the government intervene with my family affair, for example? That's politics as well. Is the city that I'm living in, does it have good public transportation? Does it have good public spaces? That's politics. So basically my entire quality of life apparently is dictated and affected by politics. And then I realized that I've decided that I wanted to stay in Indonesia, right? So I want to build a life in Indonesia. I want to build my career. I want to build my family. I want to live my life in Indonesia. And so obviously then, if I wanted to live in Indonesia, my quality of life in Indonesia will be deeply affected by politics. That's why I feel like, oh, okay, I need to care. So that's the second part. And then the third part is I realized that the system of governments that govern Indonesia is democracy. And I guess growing up in a democratic country like Indonesia, although it's not imperfect and things like that, I do take a lot of things for granted. But I realized that, okay, not all countries are governed this way. And then what does it mean to live in a democracy? So I began to learn most of that. And then I realized that my quality of life is affected by politics through regulations, right? So who gets to make these regulations? Politicians. Who choose these politicians? I realized, oh, it's us. So in a way, my quality of life is dependent on the quality of regulation. The quality of regulations is dependent on the quality of government and leaders, and the quality of government and leaders is dependent on the quality of choice that the majority of Indonesians will do. And so it is in my best interest to make sure that as many as possible, like the people of Indonesia needs to understand political literacy, because the more people that understand political literacy, it will feed back to my quality of life. So I guess that's like a very, very personal reason, and why I feel like promoting political literacy and political education is not really like a selfless and altruistic thing that somebody can do, but it's in every single person's best interest if they're living in a democratic country, you know. And so there's like a direct connection between my quality of life and whether people are very politically literate. And throughout that process, of course, I realized a lot of things, like it's not as easy as I thought, and the quality of understanding and literacy and things like that. But I guess if you're asking personal motivation, it's as simple as that.
No, yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people who are studying abroad dan mau pulang ke Indonesia will definitely relate back to that juga. Karena kayak when you say you study abroad and like when you study abroad, you don't really think about the things that could affect you. But then like the year that you're going back, especially like for me personally, kayak jadi mulai lebih banyak, oh iya ya, kayak in the next 5 years, like the leaders of Indonesia tuh bakal definitely affect me, as definitely affect my parents, how my niece is going to go to school, kayak gimana nanti dia bayar sekolahnya, gimana, like everything is like really politically based. Dan kayak I feel like us existing itself is already political juga gitu, kayak who we are, like our identities, dan kayak where we are in the social strata. I feel like that itself is already very political sih. Jadi kayak that's kayak a really good motivational motivational approach to political literacy, ya gak sih, Nat?
Yeah, because like we live we live in a society. Yeah. And we just kind of have to care about each other. I think that's how I kind of
That's
went through it.
sweet.
We need to care about each other.
Sorry.
We have to like take care of each other because we saw what COVID did to a lot of us, right? So maybe jumping off of that, since we did kind of try to define, right, like what is political literacy and like why is it important to us personally? Maybe what are some of the most like important aspects of political literacy itself? Is it just, I think earlier you mentioned about like understanding how the government works, but is there something like maybe more specific to it?
I think I think political literacy as a whole is important. I feel like all the different aspects are connected to one another. For example, like understanding the political system, how the government's working. That's definitely very, very important for you to build a foundational understanding, for you to begin to interact with the world. So for you, for example, if you see like something's wrong happening in your city, you would know which person to complain to, right?
That's
like for you to know, you need to know how the government systems are built. Biar nggak semuanya komplain ke Jokowi gitu misalnya. Kan sebenarnya ada pemerintah daerah apa segala gitu. Jadi maksudnya kayak just so that you can navigate this political world better gitu. But then there's also the awareness of current events, right? You need to understand kayak what laws are being passed, what updates, what systemic updates are being done towards the political system, and a lot of different things. Who's running, what's their background, political party that's currently in power. And you don't have to be like the most updated, I feel like, but you just have to have a sense of what's happening around you. And of course, there's also the historical aspect. I feel like this is a very, very important aspect to understand why we're here in the first place. We need to understand like our history and how that shapes a lot of like the prejudice, the bias, why systems are this way, why do we have this form of government, things like that. So it's because I feel like there's no current events happen in a vacuum. They happen because of a lot of historical buildup, and it's shaped by the system of governments as well. And then I also feel like there's a dimension of political participation in the sense like you're literate, you know how, for example, how your vote matters, how does it affect things, how can you participate, in what areas can you participate, kenapa sih orang suka demo, things like that. Because if like studying abroad, I feel like that it will give you a heightened sense of sensitivity in a sense. You get to contrast like two different countries, and sometimes you get a better understanding of, oh, actually things can be another way. Nggak harus seperti ini. Kenapa status quo-nya kayak begini? And I'm not too sure about in Australia, but when I was in uni in America, for example, and I'm pretty sure in Australia too, going out to the streets and protesting and demanding things from the government, that's very, very normal. And a lot of the educated middle class people do it, right?
Yeah.
But here in Indonesia, who goes out to the streets and protests? It's usually not the educated elites or the educated middle class.
You're actually so right. Yeah.
And usually kalau orang demo, apa yang dibilang sama middle class elite? Ih, nggak ada kerjaan, ya kan?
Yeah, that's true.
So that's why I feel like a lot of the middle class here, or like the educated people in Indonesia, are still not politically literate enough. Also, it's not as pervasive as, for example, in Australia and America, where maybe democracy is older, right?
Yeah.
There's that dimension as well. And then, of course, knowing your rights, and at the flip side, knowing your responsibility as a democratic citizen, and being able to critically analyze all that to synthesize it.
Definitely. Yeah. My
That,
gosh.
it kind of segues really well for our next question, which is, what are the consequences of low political literacy in a society? Because I think you mentioned earlier how the educated middle class here aren't as maybe engaged. So like, I guess we could outline what are the consequences of that.
Well, there's a lot. There. So many, right? I mean, just from the get-go, like from what I outlined maybe earlier, again, like the quality of our leaders, I feel like to a certain extent are a reflection of the quality of those who choose them. And so, for example, I know like a lot of Indonesian, for example, are complaining that the leaders that they get are not as competent or not the best that they could get. And I'm not saying that this is the only explanation, but this is like a food for thought, definitely like a factor. Say, for example, if a political party would like to put forward their best candidate, a candidate who's maybe not popular, but they're very, very good worker, have great ethics, have the best intention, they have great program for the people, things like that. But they're not famous, they're not a celebrity, and they don't have a bunch of money to give away, right?
Yeah,
right.
The question is, do you think the Indonesian people will choose them? Or do you think Indonesian people will choose them as opposed to, for example, artis sinetron gitu, atau somebody yang bagi-bagi bansos? Kalau misalnya enggak, that means there's something wrong with the political system and the demand, right? Because we can't really criticize, for example, we can't always criticize, oh yeah, the political party, they're always championing artis sinetron, or they're always championing like the Nepo babies who have a lot of money. But then when they put forward, and it has been happening for a couple of time, and I know like a lot of very, very good candidates, kayak caleg-caleg in the previous election, yang bagus-bagus mereka maju, nggak dipilih. So there's a dimension of demand from the people, because unfortunately in a democracy, if the leaders needs to get elected by the people. And so if the people have very, very low political literacy, they don't understand how their vote matters, all they care about is apa untungnya buat saya, kamu bisa kasih apa ke saya, gitu. The election can always be rigged by those who have more money, by those who have more exposure, more resources. And again, like, it's not always the people's fault as well, right? Because there are systemic aspect to this, like poverty and education and other things like that. Like we can't always blame them, but I think that the pool of people that we can definitely hold to a higher accountability are the educated middle class, or educated middle class, because unfortunately a lot of them, they have the resources to learn, and they get to say no to like bribes and things like that, but they're very not literate in politics still in Indonesia. And so just from the get-go, I feel like low literacy in a democracy is kind of a recipe for disaster, because then it reflects the quality of leader that gets elected, and then those leaders will reflect the quality of regulations that they make, and then they'll reflect back to the quality of life, and so forth.
Yeah.
And so forth, the cycle continues.
Yeah. I've also actually like read a book recently that says basically entertainment kayak dangdutan, saweran, by like especially during like political campaigns tuh kayak entertainment is the currency to politics in Indonesia. And I feel like that is actually partially true, I feel, especially like with the things that we've seen recently deh kayaknya, apalagi ya kayak this year. Jadi kayak mungkin we're not there yet as a society buat kayak have like education and kayak all these fruitful things as a currency in politics gitu, kayak we're still grabbing onto entertainment, dan mungkin itu juga caused by what you said about like all these systemic poverty and education issues yang kayak make people cling to entertainment as something that could distract them from their problems in real life. Dan kayak mungkin kayak jadi kayak they use entertainment to basically kayak escape from like the problems or like the issues that they have. Dan because of that jadi agak sedikit blurry kayak which is entertainment and which is politics, and like like all these confusion mungkin ya yang terjadi.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like but we have to kind of question the system itself, in a sense, like that is how democracy functions, right? As long as you have an election, people will do whatever it takes to get elected.
Be popular.
Exactly.
Popular, and you put in social media into the mix, you will. I don't think it's possible to have a democracy without an entertainment aspect towards it. That's why it's called the political theatrics, right? And I guess social media push it to the extreme. And from my experience, I feel like entertainment, making things fun, is not always bad, as long as it's not the end itself, or it's not the only aspect. And if an informed citizen, they can be entertained, but then still question the credibility behind that entertainment. And I feel like that's what we want to get, not like a boring politics filled with just like programs and vision and
debates,
track record,
boring.
Like entertainment, like being creative. It's definitely not a bad thing, and it's definitely something preferable than identity politics.
Yeah, true.
That's true.
Definitely. But maybe you could say the quality of entertainment that is yang bisa determine gitu loh, kayak
yeah
no, yeah, definitely. And in your opinion, this is a little bit is the public generally aware of political party stances and policies when they vote for them, in your opinion?
No, I don't think so. I think one, because there's a lot of political
There's a lot of them.
It's almost impossible for you to keep track of every single one of them.
True.
And then the second, it's not made as clear, I feel. Like it's not as easy to find. And then third, actually, there's this also aspect where, to a certain extent, a lot of scholars here in Indonesia and a lot of political observers here argue that knowing a political party's stances are not as telling as it would, for example, in Australia or in the US,
America.
because in US, for example, let's take the US, right? There's
Yeah.
only two political parties and they're very ideological. You
Yes.
know what is a Republican stance and what is a
Yeah.
Democrat
Democrat.
stance, and they will not switch side. Like they will not work together. They're very opposing in their values, ideologies, and stances. But here in Indonesia, actually, political parties, because we're a multi-party system, political party needs to join into a coalition when they want to put forth like a candidate, right? Presidential candidate, because there's like a threshold. Because of this need to join forces and hold hands, political parties don't usually oppose one another, but they're very pragmatic in their view. So it's more like a lot of them, a lot of academician actually argues that the landscape of political party in Indonesia is more towards like whether they're more is leaning or secular or Pancasila leaning.
Yeah.
But even that, the difference is very, very minimal. And usually instances, it's either whether they're in the government coalition or they're in an opposition, right? But there's actually a very, very interesting argument made by one political scientist that says it's actually precisely because Indonesian political party are very pragmatic in their ideology and stances that we are very stable as a country. Compared to, for example, in the US, where tension and polarization are extremely high. But because here political parties are willing to compromise in a sense, it does increase the chance of corruption, collusion, and nepotism. But at the same time,
It's
it protects the nation's stability because the elites, they hold hands.
Yeah, I heard something very similar. It's from a different political analyst who gave a talk here in Melbourne, and he was talking about how it's maybe this is a little crude, but the way that he kind of puts it is almost like parties in Indonesia are kind of like an illusion of choice in the sense of everyone kind of hold hands anyway, so it doesn't, there's not as much significance in kind of differentiating one from the other. And at the same time, he also, I think, agrees with that point about stability, about how because since 1965, our country's ideology is only Pancasila, there's not like a space for necessarily like an opposing ideology to be in the mix. So everyone sticks with Pancasila, and that's how we became to be.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember in the talk as well, I think he put it like this. Coba kalau misalnya kita taruh political parties in like let's say US gitu ya, kayak we have the political church kayak liberalism and conservatism. They're very clear on where they are. Tapi if we put Indonesian political parties in that chart, let's say not in the liberalism or conservatism lah, maybe in like we don't even have what chart do we put them on, like what like from what do we ukur stances mereka dan kayak ideologi mereka gitu. Kayak if we put them in a range, kita tuh nggak tahu apa ya kayak alat ukurnya tuh apa to basically differentiate them, I guess. And even if there are differences, it's very blurry. I feel especially for the general public juga kayaknya ya masih kayak apa kayak based on agama kah, based on apakah gitu. So I feel like it's still a little bit blurry for people to understand.
Absolutely. But I do agree, like if we were to have a distinction, I think it's either the more like the Islamic leaning versus like the Pancasila / secular leaning. I think that is the most the only kind of ideological dimension that there's a slight but significant difference in several of the political party, and you can tell kind of. But aside from that, I think
exactly
very,
aside from that, and okay, another kind of cornering question here, then you can answer as broad or as specific as you want. What false political narratives do you think are dominant in Indonesia so far?
In Indonesia,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, there's so many.
We
Oh my,
figured.
I'm interested. This is interesting because when we came up with these questions, I actually didn't know what we would say as even the answers. We just wanted to know.
So I think one of the thing that I was most shocked in to finding out is so in Indonesia, politik Jawa is very influential in how we do politics, right?
Yeah.
And so apparently a lot of Indonesians they choose their leader based on like symbols kind of. So in politik Jawa tuh sangat-sangat kental sama simbol gitu kan, sama simbol-simbol things like
Yeah.
that. Apparently like I forgot the name, but there's a term in politik Jawa where a
Yes.
certain leader has that quality, and kalau misalnya ada kualitas itu dia cocok jadi pemimpin gitu. And so a lot of people still use like that kind of symbol, and mereka dengerin kayak senior mereka atau kayak ketua agama mereka gitu about like arahan lah tentang itu. And so I think that's like one of the very pervasive political belief yang I've heard. I haven't encountered it, maybe because it's outside of my circle. And then there's, I guess, the classic like, oh ya siapa aja yang dipilih mah sama aja lah ya gitu. Itu banyak juga definitely, and that's definitely wrong. Because again, like choosing like being an active participant in politics in a democracy is a long game that you can't always see like the direct impact of your choice, but it is still needed, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Itu, and then apa lagi? Apparently, okay, I don't know how pervasive, like how many, but I've heard this like a couple of times, I guess. Especially amongst like the younger generation.
Okay.
So a lot. Yes, I don't know how pervasive again, but apparently some of them take this very seriously. A lot of them. So there's like a joke. There's a running joke how, you know how like in American politics, there's people say like, oh, the Simpsons always like predict.
Yeah.
So apparently here in Indonesia, it's very similar to Naruto, like the
Yes,
anime. I personally don't watch Naruto, so I can't really speak about like the accuracy of it. But apparently like the Hokage, which is the leader in Naruto, like this the pattern fits the Indonesian president pattern so well. And when you follow that, like Jokowi is Naruto. And so during like Jokowi's second election, like a lot of people chose Jokowi because he's Naruto.
He fits the quote unquote like, prophecy.
Yeah, I guess this plays again to like the symbol thing.
Maybe.
Again, like I don't know how pervasive this is, but one of my friends says like it's actually a thing like amongst like younger people. So I guess there's that. So there's so many, and I guess when you don't base your political decision based on merit and based on values and based on will this person be fit for their job, you can choose them based on whatever.
Anything.
Right?
Exactly.
Really anything. It opens up the window to anything. And when you don't understand like the political system, like how democracy work and why your vote matters, things like that, like you are not incentivized to care anyway. Yeah. So I guess there's that.
That's true. Apalagi kan kita like Indonesians are very heavy on symbolism dan kayak percaya ini itu gitu kan.
Also, there's a big anime community.
Yeah. Tapi I'm actually quite shocked, maksudnya kayak ternyata masih ini ya, a lot of people still follow those kinds of symbolism, like actually to affect their choice in politics gitu.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
again, like maybe itu kayak segmented ya, tapi yang
Yeah.
I do
Probably
believe yang
segmented.
dipercayain semua golongan, yang banyak banget masih percaya itu milih siapa aja nggak matter.
Oh my God. And I've
Itu
seen
tuh di mana-mana sih, itu pasti masih ada.
ya, Wiwi juga kan emang sering pakai Naruto as like one of the
Yeah,
memes
as a
pakainya.
meme thing that you guys use.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Mhm.
I think in my own personal experience, like the Naruto memes, I kind of saw it as kind of ironic. It's like kind of just a joke, but I haven't heard of anyone actually
I feel
being
like
for real about it.
I feel like it's because
I
maybe
can't
like
tell.
some people they're like, oh man, like I have no idea how am I gonna choose, you know, and then maybe as like a funny
Yeah.
thing,
Funny
they're
thing.
like,
It's probably like a
you
funny
know
thing.
what?
Yeah.
I'm gonna choose this guy because he's Naruto. maybe it's that. It's not like, oh, I seriously believe it. Kayak mungkin nggak kayak gitu ya.
I wonder tapi kalau ada orang yang
Ya
kayak
mungkin ada juga kali emang gitu kan.
If any one of our listeners you happen to know the
Maybe gue
in-depth
nggak
of this,
tahu.
please leave a comment. We gotta know.
Nggak tahu.
Iya.
Nah iya makanya kayak kalau ya itulah, I mean the human mind are very susceptible to a lot of different emotionally based decision making, right? So
Yeah. And in a sense of, since we did talk about memes, right? How does maybe like political satire or maybe humor can influence political literacy and engagement? Because like I guess there's like both the positive side of it, as that
Mhm.
it becomes more popular, people can, I guess, not contextualize, sorry, more like relate it to something they already
Yeah.
know. And kind of the negative side of it, where they just take the symbolisms and just run with it. What do you think?
Yeah. So I actually think that it does more than harm. So I think getting people to political literacy requires a lot of steps, right? And the very first step is for them to actually be interested in it. And for a lot of people, like that's the barrier right there. Like we can make like the best content, the greatest, most educational political literacy program, but if nobody wants to read or watch or consume it, percuma ya kan. Jadi the first step is by whatever means we need to get them to be interested first. And I think this is where memes, pop culture, satire, jokes, TikTok edit, things like that plays a role. And we see a lot of very, very creative effort in the recent election. And I really do appreciate like Indonesia's literacy and making jokes and memes are actually really, really
they're astronomically good
here.
It's actually very, very sophisticated. Mereka tuh bisa mikir cepat banget gitu dan fast banget gitu ya. So I actually really appreciate that about Indonesia and our community. And I've seen a lot of creativity being done in that aspect from like, for example, the K-pop fandom, from like the anime fandom, from a lot of like alt accounts on Twitter, or even from TikTok editors and creators and things like that. And they're just basically having fun and creating funny memes and things like that, but also like kind of like hinting at like political literacy and how we should care and why this is wrong and things like that. And I feel like engaging in those content, and we do that a lot in WeWe as well, right? We use a lot of memes and jokes and things like that. It makes politics a lot less intimidating and looks a lot more relevant. And so I think, again, like entertainment memes and things like that, it's never wrong, or it's not like I don't see it as a bad thing as long as it's not an end to itself, as long as it's not all there is. And once people are interested, then you can begin to educate them. And so I think satire, things like that, plays a huge role in that. The second part, I feel like satire and jokes and contents like that play a role is it helps people to be more critical about a lot of the status quo in the way that maybe if kalau misalnya gue gitu bilang kayak oh ini harusnya nggak boleh begini nih, ini gini kayak ngekritik langsung gitu. Usually some people will be turned off by that. They'll be like, oh my gosh, why are you so negative? Like I don't want to hear this criticism, kayak bikin pusing, aku nggak mau, capek gitu. But when you packaged it in a joke, in a comedy, kayak in a musical, like Andovi and Jovial did with
Oh
Polarisasi,
yeah, that's really
for
cool.
example.
Yeah.
Like the message is still delivered, but in a better way. Oh my gosh, you can see my.
Oh god, you can sit down. I was like, I just saw it.
Yeah. So yeah, I feel like that's like how it plays a role.
Yeah, no, definitely. Wow. Tapi iya sih. That musical is really cool. Kayak
Yeah, it is.
it was inspiring. And like, oh my God, as a Hamilton fan, I'm really proud that we finally get to have that in like an Indonesian context. It was really, I was so proud of that. Okay, well, let's wrap this up and let's just put things in a more hopeful note. To you, Kak, what is your hope for the future of political literacy in Indonesia? And you can be as ideal as you
Realistic.
want. Yeah. Do you have a specific dream or a goal to which arah kayak political literacy Indonesia kemana in like a few more years?
And I feel like I'm not gonna be very it's not gonna be very idealistic or in the sense that it's a hope. I feel like we are heading towards the right direction. I do think that a lot of young people, the next generation, are becoming a lot more critical, especially with the presence of social media, because then they get to compare. Like maybe back then, the only people that get to contrast and compare are people like us, right, who studied abroad and have the privilege of like seeing the world, for example. But now everybody gets to do that because of social media and things like that. And I think because of that, a lot of people are becoming more critical, and we can see that actually from the trend of how politicians do their campaign. If we analyze the election that just happened with like elections that happened like 5 years ago, for example, first there's a lot more forum that focuses more on substance and issues and track record now. And a lot of this is platformed by the candidates' campaign team themselves. And that shows that a president candidate campaign team, they will do their research, right? They will first look at the data and see what is it that the voters want, what is it that the voters like, and from then they'll craft their campaign strategy, obviously. And so for candidates and their campaign strategists to do a lot of campaign that focuses on rhetoric and substance and focuses a lot on issues shows that there's a growing appetite, I think, in like the general populations. They want to know their programs. They don't want to just be fed by entertainment and things like that. So there's definitely a growing trend towards that, and that's why a lot of political candidates and politicians begin to engage in that type of campaign. The second part is the drastic reduction in how politicians use identity politics. And if you compare that to like 5 years ago, I think a lot of them try to get votes by using issues kayak goreng sara lah dibilangnya kan.
Yeah, that's
politik
true.
identitas, pakai agama, ras, things like that. But now, I think I've seen that actually being put forth as like a campaign strategy. Nggak ada yang kayak coba goreng agama atau yang terlalu goreng kayak suku, ras, things like that. Mereka malah lomba-lomba paling asik di internet aja gitu kan.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Itu kan it reflects the demand of the majority sebenarnya. Jadi I do see like a trend that's moving towards a positive direction. And mungkin sekarang baru mulai jadi lebih tertarik aja gitu. People like to be entertained with politics, or they like to engage with politics in a funny way and
Yeah.
things like
Mhm.
that. But I feel like there's definitely still like a positive trend growing that. So my hope is that this trend will continue and that people, especially young people who makes up the majority, right, of voters now, they will continue to be more politically literate, so because if the general masses become more politically literate, there'll be a different types of demand. And if there's a
Mhm.
different types of demand, different types of politician will be put forth and different types of politician will be elected and there are different types of regulation will be made. And so just for it to continue towards political literacy.
Wow, yeah, no, that's great. Then kayak I see, especially kayak what is up Indonesia. Like the reason kayak I really admire like the platform itself is because kayak that the fun unsur of like bringing politics relatable into like digestible for our generation tuh, I feel like that itself could be an aspiration for political literacy for someone like let's say 10 years ago gitu. Kayaknya kalau misalnya 10 years ago ada orang bisa bermimpi kayak where do political literacy mau dibawa tuh, kayaknya What is Up Indonesia is actually one of the stepping stones for that. Especially like it is definitely for me gitu. Dan kayak it is a really impacting platform karena I see more platforms similar to What is Up Indonesia's visions and missions starting to also show up gitu, dan kayak maybe they could approach it in a different way ya, tapi kayak all these critical thinkers in our generation especially yang kayak awalnya ngangong-ngangong tentang politik tuh jadi kayak at least enggaknya have the basics of it in our background gitu. And kayak you don't even have to actively, kayak comment atau contribute or anything, or just having it like in your scroll di
Feed.
FYP atau kayak in your home
Mhm.
feed is definitely something that yang kayak could really impact someone in a certain way gitu. Ya nggak sih, Nat?
Yeah. I totally agree because I remember, I mean, I was abroad for a few years as well, and so I experienced 2016, like the American election, like abroad when I was with other foreigners around me, and I was like, whoa, I suddenly know way too much about America, and I don't know anything about my own country. And so I think platforms now, like especially Bijak Pemilih when like a few months back, right? The way that you guys kind of wrote out all the track record was so like refreshing and so like easy to understand as well. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that.
That's for saying, yeah,
I'm
thank you for
really
the
for
greetings.
that.
Yeah. Do you want to do closing question then?
Yeah, okay, sure, yeah. So for our closing question, we can talk about this together, three of us. Any suggestions on how to stay engaged with politics abroad, Indonesian politics?
You can follow What is Up Indonesia.
Slay.
Little plug moment there.
Little plug moment. Listen to our podcast. No.
You can follow What Do You Think? Podcast.
Um,
Let's go.
Yeah, I
no,
mean,
but
but
like,
in all seriousness, yeah, like connecting with platforms like this, like that's what is Up Indonesia we is made for also. So just being active and following relevant channels and being plugged into communities absolutely can keep you updated. And I mean, this then is like in social media age, like it's very easy for you to stay updated.
and like, at least this is at Monash. I'm sure this applies to a lot of other universities, at least in Australia. Australia has a really long-standing record for good Indonesian studies. Like there's a pretty good history of that since
Yeah.
we're literally neighbors. So if you go to like your university's library, there's probably a lot of content in Indonesia there already. At least from my own personal experience, when I go to the Monash library, there's just like a couple of like rows of just Indonesian books, some of them in Indonesian, others in English. So you can like make use of that and borrow books and read about the history.
Definitely, yeah. Especially, I was actually quite shocked loh when Monash tuh kayak have like Indonesian studies gitu, kayak and they don't even kayak it doesn't even have to be non-fiction, tapi kayak fiction books juga ada gitu kayak, and like they're translated in English. I was actually quite kayak shocked aja gitu kayak, they do take Indonesian studies seriously here ternyata.
Yeah. I know Australia takes Indonesian study very seriously.
Yeah,
Mm.
like that's why yang main Thor tuh siapa? What's his name? Chris Evans? No, not Chris Evans.
I
The
don't
one who
know.
played Thor. Like he
I
mentioned, like he
forgot.
mentioned Indonesian, like in
Oh,
an
okay.
interview, and
That's
that made me
cool.
realize, okay, oh my God, yeah, they took Indonesian seriously. But yeah, oh my gosh, slay guys, that was a really good discussion. Thank you so much, Kak Abigail, for coming to What Do You Think and sharing like the most important insights and ways for us to stay engaged. Apalagi buat those who are just coming to Melbourne atau like Australia or anywhere abroad, especially. And in this episode, I think we already talked about kayak why political literacy is very important in general. What does it mean to everyone? Tuh pasti beda-beda, and we
Yeah.
all have our personal reasons to it. And we also talked about how satire and memes are a way to basically, like, it's one of the first steps for people to approach political literacy. And that's a really great way to capture, especially as Gen Z's attention as. And I think kayak for apa future generations to come juga, especially kayak mereka kan udah in touch banget with like digital, in like this digital world. Kayak I think it's a bait for them gitu to basically kayak
Yeah.
be dragged into sort of yeah, political literacy itself deh kayaknya. And we also talked about some improvements that can be made and talking about what we can do to stay engaged while we're abroad. So that was a really fun episode, guys, and I hope it was informative and motivating for you guys to listen.
Any closing statements from you? Anything?
I'd say just find the angle and type of engagement and politics that are interesting for you and go from there. You don't have to like take everything wholesale from the first step.
Definitely.
So I'll do the closing now. Thank you so much for tuning in. This podcast has been brought to you by PPIA Monash. You can find WDYT on Spotify and YouTube. So just search up What Do You Think PPIA Monash and you should be able to spot our channels. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, WDYT.PPIA Monash for podcast updates and behind the scenes content, as well as, of course, follow What Is Up Indonesia and Kak Abigail Limuria's Instagrams. If you want to suggest a topic, give feedback, or interested in becoming a guest speaker, you can DM us on Instagram or email us in the link in our bio. Yes, so thank you again, and see you next episode. Woo!